Uh, good evening to all of you. I, Dr. Vinay Kumar, Assistant Professor in the Department of Ancient Indian History, Culture and Archaeology, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi, and associated with Indology Foundation, New Delhi. And I am heading the Archaeological Researches Wing of Indology Foundation, which is a Delhi-based organization, and it is an ideology-free, value-centric organization that works along with the premier institutions and the widely acclaimed scholars of the globe. And it has many first-hand revolutionary findings and the discoveries of this foundation. And regarding today's lecture, I would like to shed some light on it that the invention of the pottery is a most important landmark in man's march from barbarism to the civilization. And all of us know that a major problem of Indian archaeology has been that it has not identified our ancient pottery types very properly. And for this reason, the credible chronology of the Indian pottery is not yet finalized. And the further scientific studies on the Indian pottery are still great lacuna, and we do not as yet know the technology of the several ceramic wares. And kalas is one of the most popular pottery types used in yagya and the other rituals in the Hindu tradition. If kalas is running from the 3rd millennium BCE, as archaeologist work indicates, it may provide an opportunity to look at our history from a new perspective. And we know that Hinduism has no history letting you how it is originated despite 74 years of our independence. And it is the Kalash and then the Triphala that helps us writing the beginning of the Hinduism, the archaeological objects for the Hindu history. To learn more about this colors, this presentation has been organized today, and it is the first such attempt in India, as our US fraternity also are associated with it. And we realized the vacuum and then recruited 12 interns in January 2021 to work on Kalas, Kamandal, and Yagya. And it was done by our head research and the internship wing of Indology Foundation under the chairmanship of Professor Deenbandhu Pandey sir. And for this, before I just go further, first of all, I would like to welcome our distinguished keynote speaker today, Dr. B.R. Mani sir, distinguished expert panel, Dr. V.S. Sonavani sir, Professor V.S. Sonavani sir, Dr. Kharagwal sir here, and our patrons, Dr. Raj Kumar Jain ji, and the Professor Deenbandhu Pandey sir. And when we talk about the study of the pottery, it was neglected in earlier days by the archaeologists. Only the complete vessels found in the excavations were preserved, and the broken ones were rejected. Not to speak to the potsherds, it was Sir Flinders Peter, the great Egyptologist, who showed how important is the study of the pottery for the reconstruction of the ancient lifeway. And the Robert Furtwängler was the first to preserve the painted pottery from the excavation, whereas the Petrie showed that even plain pottery is equally important. Thus, gradually, the pottery was recognized as an important artifact, and in course of the time came to occupy a unique position. Even a rim fragment can give us an idea of the form of the vessels, and pottery, therefore, is rightly regarded as the alphabet of archaeology. And today we know that we have an array of the pottery tradition in ancient India, like painted grey ware, black and red ware, northern black polished ware culture, red polished ware, rolletted ware, russet coated ware, Rancine ware, Muslim glazed ware, and many more, besides the regional pottery types of the Kaitha, Ahar, and Jajorvi wares. And for this, I would like to call upon Lalit Misra ji, who is the founder of this Indology Foundation, so he can shed some light, or he can make us to understand how this, the purpose of what is the purpose of today's session, and somehow he will try to throw some light on the main objectives of Indology Foundation. Lalit Misra, sir.
Namaste and welcome to all. Today it's a great day, a privilege for us to have such great eclectics and scholars like Dr. B.R. Mani, the keynote speaker, and Professor Sunavaneji, Professor J.S. Kharakwalji, those who have dedicated their life to the Indian archaeology. At the outset, I have to acknowledge great generosity shown by Honorable Minister of the State for the Culture and External Affairs, Meenakshi Lekhiji, who we requested to be with us on today's session as our chief guest. But for the back-to-back meetings and the other important engagements, she could not manage time. But it was running in her back of mind, and probably for that reason, she managed to send a goodwill message 45 minutes before our session, along with an additional call coming from her office. So we have to, uh, we express our profound regards towards her generosity. We want, we want such approachable ministers. Thank you, Meenakshi. Dear friends, in 2020, we had opportunity to observe a presentation given by Dr. Amrita Sarkar, Deccan College, Pune. In her presentation, she presented a lot of potteries, lot of such objects which are still continuing in India. And one of most prominent pottery type was the Kalasha. I remember having visited National Museum once in 2015-16, and where I spotted the Kalasha pottery type on their display. So it warranted further studies, and for that we requested Dr. B.R. Mani, and he was very kind to conduct this study. And today, that fortunate day has come to have this session. I would like to tell our audience, particularly the students, that we inherit three things from the Chalukurathi period of India, particularly Indus Valley culture, or the Harappan culture, or the Sindhu Saraswati culture, as you name it. These three things are the yogasanas, which are carved out in Harappan seals, then the rimmed thali, the vegetable thali that we are using, that is coming, that we are inheriting from the Indus Valley period, and the Ayurveda. How Ayurveda? Ayurveda, if you ever went to National Museum, you will find on the display the particles of Triphala, the Ayurvedic herbal medicine, and the Shilajit. And Shilajit was not found in Indus Valley region, particularly Punjab and Haryana and other regions of Rajasthan. It was found in the high peaks of the Himalaya. So from Himalaya, they were collecting the Shilajit and using in various urban centers of the Harappan culture. So they were fully aware of the Ayurveda, as the archaeological finds reminds us. I do not know why our historians have not given much attention to these valuable inheritance, which shows the culture was not diminished in a particular day. Rather, we, the people of India, have inherited a lot from the Indus Valley culture. So it warrants a new look from a new perspective to study the Indus Valley culture. So this is all from our observations. We are very happy to have today's great session by Dr. B.R. Mani. From him, you have already watched a very valuable presentation on the second urbanization, and that presentation also bursts a lot of myths. So without taking much of your time, moving further, I would request Dr. Vinay to take it from me. Over to Dr. Vinay.
Thank you, Lalit Misra sir. And before I invite Dr. B.R. Mani for his talk on colors in Indian art, tradition, and archaeology, some new interpretation, I would like to give a brief introduction about him. Although he doesn't need any introduction, everybody is well familiar about him, about his work, about his contributions towards our country and towards our field of archaeology. But it is my formal duty to just give an introduction about him. Dr. B.R. Mani has been a renowned field archaeologist, numismatist, and the art critic who has served as the Director General of National Museum Institute, New Delhi, and the Additional Director General in the Archaeological Survey of India. Recently, he has been awarded ICHR National Fellow. He has taught in Banaras Hindu University and the Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies from 1978 till 1984, and then he joined Archaeological Survey of India at Aurangabad. Since then, he has been involved in conservation of the monuments in the Maharashtra, Goa, Delhi, Jammu and Kashmir. He has discovered a large number of archaeological sites in these places, besides also in Uttar Pradesh and Haryana during his explorations. Dr. Mani has many excavations to his credit. He was associated with the excavation at Khairadi, Uttar Pradesh, Banahalli in Karnataka, Daulatabad in Maharashtra. He directed many large-scale excavations also at Daulatabad and Lalkot, Salimgarh Fort in Delhi, Harnol and Muhammad Nagar in Haryana, Jafar Chak, Kanishpur, Ambaran in Jammu and Kashmir, Sishwania, Sankisa, Ayodhya, Lathia, Sakradi, and Piprawa, Ganveria, Salargarh complex, all in Uttar Pradesh. He also conducted the tile excavations at Devrao, Dharmsingwa, Pipari, Orai, and the Mundair in Uttar Pradesh and Kavari Patnam in Tamil Nadu. He excavated Sarnath in Uttar Pradesh in 2013 and 14 and carried out the salvage operation at Bhor Majra in Rohtak in 2013-14. Dr. Mani directed excavation at the disputed site of Ayodhya from March to August 2003 and submitted its detailed report in record time span of 15 days after the excavation. It is a record in the world of archaeology, and his work was appreciated in the judgment of Allahabad High Court, Lucknow bench also, and we know the result of that excavation that today we are proud to say that we have the Ayodhya temple at the Ram temple at Ayodhya. And he is a member of various national and international organizations. In the field, he has widely traveled to European as well as Asian countries in international seminars and conferences. He has many books and supervised many scholars for his PhD work, and about 170 research papers are to his credit. And he is an able administrator, excavator, and editor. And he is the esteemed editor of some of the popular journal of archaeology like Puratat, Puraprabha, and History Today. So this brief after this brief introduction, with humble request, I would request my teacher, my mentor, my guide, as well as the today's learned speaker, Dr. B.R. Mani, to give his talk.
Thank you, Lalit Mishra ji and Dr. Vinay Kumar for inviting me. शारदीय नवरात्र के इस पावन अवसर पर न्यूरोलॉजी फाउंडेशन द्वारा आयोजित बिल्डिंग ग्रैंड नरेटिव्स ऑफ द इंडियन सिविलाइजेशन के अंतर्गत आज मैं शुभकामनाएं देता हूं और इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन और विशेष रूप से श्री ललित मिश्र जी के प्रति आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। मेरा आज का विषय जैसा कि आप जानते ही हैं, कलश इन इंडियन आर्ट ट्रेडिशन एंड आर्कियोलॉजी, सम न्यू इंटरप्रिटेशंस। मैं समय जैसा कि काफी हो गया है, मैं स्टार्ट करना चाहूंगा। कलश or ghat is a pot which becomes a purna ghat when it is filled with water and topped with a coronet of mango leaves and a coconut. The combination is called purna ghat, bhadra ghat, purna kumbh or mangal kalash. The coconut on the pot is normally tied with a red cloth or red sacred thread. Kalash Sthapan and Kalash Pujan are significant features of Navratras. Kalash is considered as an auspicious object in Indian tradition, Brahmanism, Buddhism, and Jainism. It figures in Indian art and architecture as both auspicious and a decorated motif. It was generally used in decorating bases and capitals of pillars in sacred places. Kalash as you can see, is part of the temple pillars. It is shown at all the places, sometimes in the base, sometimes in the capital, and even sometimes in the center of the pillar. And here we have two pictures of Abhishek through Kalash, one on a Shivling, and Vishnu being showered by dual Kalashas. This is a pillar relief from Ramaswamy Temple, Kumbakonam. Then we have a very large number of representations of Kalash with Abhishek Lakshmi in various mediums of art, in stone sculptures, in terracottas first, and then also in the paintings. So here we have some sculptures like the sculpture on the left side is from Bhaja caves, 1st, 2nd century BC. Similarly, terracotta figurines are also found at a number of sites. And this is the elephants pouring out kumbhas onto Lakshmi from Tanjore. Kalash, as I said in the beginning, it is also represented in Buddhist art. You can see from Amravati the representation of Kalash. From Sarnath also, Kalash is represented in sculpture where a deity has got is supposed to be standing on two Kalashas. Then the important aspects of Kalash are that Kalash is held in hands of various deities, like you can see Bhaishajya Guru, who is a Buddhist deity, and then Dhanvantari, and it is also held in the hand of Varun, and Varun is supposed to be the Lord of waters. In the temples, Kalash, as I was mentioning, it is found on the top, above the Amalak. There are two pictures from Kumbakonam on the left side, and sometimes on the Gopuram, like in Kottayur in Chettinad, there is a series of 7 Kalashas on the Gopuram. Sometimes there is only 1 Kalash, sometimes 5 Kalashas. So it depends on the artist, how he thought that the Kalash should be represented. Kalash is also there in Jainism, and from Chittorgarh in the Jain temple, you can see this Kalash. Kalash is also represented in many other metallic objects, and Kalash as a Rashi, which is Kumbh or Aquarius. It is throughout the world, it is known to be one of the 12 Rashis. The Purnaghat or Kalash decoration exists in Persepolitan pillar bases and in Ashokan pillars on their capitals. It is sometimes confused with inverted bell, but the close association of Vedic and Avestan pantheon brings Kalash as common to both civilizations. You can see the Sarnath Lion capital, where the Purna Ghat is shown at the lowest part of the capital. At Loria Nandangad, in the entire full pillar is there, where Kalash is represented, the capital below the lion, and in pillar bases at Persepolis, in the palace area, you can see a number of Kalashas uh, uh, below the pillars. Kalash also represents a container of fertility, the earth and the womb which nourishes life. It is also associated with elements or chakras. Thus, the worship of Purnaghat or Kalash became essential for all the significant Hindu rituals. In the Indic religions, Kalash is a sacred suit of Ashtamangalik Chinna or 8 auspicious signs. Kalash represents nectar or Amrit, and therefore it is considered very auspicious, life-giving, sacred, and a symbol of abundance. The Purna Ghat is also associated with Soma plant and juice, which the Vedic deities and sages enjoyed drinking, and such pots which contained it, along with water, milk, or even curd, are called Som Kalash. Amrit Kalash or pot having nectar is associated in the Indian tradition with the objects which came out after churning of ocean or Samudra Manthan, and was also depicted in hands of various Hindu deities. Now I'll be speaking about the Vedic connection of Kalash and the evidence from early Harappan horn deity. There exists a number of Vedic references of water buffalo entering in water pond, and the similarity is shown with Vedic deity Som entering in water or milk in the pot or kalash in early Harappan and Kashmir Neolithic pottery. I have tried to suggest that this scene is depicted over water pots generally found in excavations of some sites, first noticed at Kot Diji and later at many sites in India and Pakistan. Kot Diji in Sindh was excavated by F.A. Khan in 1955 to 57, and excavations revealed a sequence of two cultural periods. Period 1 having layers 16 to 4, representing Kot Dijian culture, with C14 dates going back to 3300 BCE, and period 2 representing mature Harappan period. So that means the Kot Dijian pottery is earlier than the mature Harappan, and that is why we call it early Harappan. The above dates of Kot Dijian or early Harappan pottery was revised later during excavations of more sites in India and Pakistan, and generally it is placed in the 4th millennium BCE. The dynastic design of horn deity is therefore an early Harappan design and not limited to Kot Diji only. It is found invariably on water pots only and not on other types of pottery. This is a very significant feature which, after examining hundreds of examples in potsherds and in full pots, we can now say that this horn deity design is depicted only on water pots or the pot which contains liquid. which is Kalash, and it is not represented on other types of pottery. Equating Som with water buffalo, it is recorded in the Rigved as Esh Suvanah Parisomah Pavitre Sargo Na Srishto Adadhavadarva Tigme Shishano Mahisho Na Shringe Ga Gavyannabhi Shuro Na Sattva. Further, it is also stated that Som enters in a pot as the water buffalo enters in water. And from the same ninth mandal, the richa is Somah Punanah Kalasham Ayasit Sidan Rigo Na Mahisho Vaneshu. So this justifies the conception that the water pots where the depiction is there of water buffalo head, or a horn deity flowing, which is shown in water, represents that the particular usage of that kalash was for keeping Som. It appears to me that Portdesian and early or pre-Harappan and Burzhom, that is in Kashmir, Neolithic horn deity depicted on pottery, and that too particularly on pots or water vessels only, represent the figure of Som in water as in stylized form of water buffalo, swimming in calm or stormy water shown with plain or wavy lines. The water having Som represented with wavy lines or plain lines depict water of the river mixed with Som as described in Rigved, where it is said, Pari prasishyadat kavi sindhorurmavadhi shritah karam bibhrat puruspriham. And you can see the pot from Burzhom where the same deity is depicted. From Kunal in Haryana, the same deity is depicted on the pot. The Soma plant and its juice prepared in the process of a holy sacrifice gave supernatural powers to the Vedic sages and deities in gaining victory over enemies and demons. Rigveda's entire ninth mandal, containing more than 1100 mantras, is devoted to Soma's praise. Its repeated references in other chapters making it one of the most prominent deities of the Vedic pantheon. Its high antiquity is altered by its references in Iranian Avesta. Som is considered the guardian of sacrifices and penance, asterism, and healing herbs. In Indian tradition, he has also been equated with moon. Som was offered to different deities in Vedic Atiratra sacrifice. There are debates about the Som plant, but it seems after studying the Rigvedic references and also references from Avesta, where Som is mentioned as Haum. Haum, an Iranian god of the harvest, health, strength, and vitality, gave a plant the same name as the Vedic Som. Haum was associated with gods Anahita, Mitra, and Atar. The plant is thought to be of the genus Ephedra, though this is contested. It was pressed for its juice, which gave strength and vitality. And normally there are two different Ephedra genus available in the Indo-Iranian area. Ephedra gerardiana, and which can be sown, and Ephedra intermedia, which can be haum. Now again, coming back to horn deity and the depiction, I would like to show you these two slides from these two photographs from Kunal. The Cordesian horn deity was perhaps the earliest of such class of supernatural being, and perhaps gave birth to the concept of horn deities, which spread around both the West Asia and the Indus-Saraswati plain towards east. At in the left side pot, you can see the depiction. Of course, it is not very clearly seen in the photograph. It was taken by me long back when I visited for the first time Kunal in the 1990s. It was found at that time, both the pots, and in the second pot there is a figure which seems to be a wooden mixer which mixes or which creates butter from milk or curd. So probably this mixer was used for mixing som ras with water and milk. There are certain representations of Cordesian pottery from various sites, Manderi, and also from Hathial, from Vedana, Kunal, from Kurzholm, and many other sites. And interestingly, it is also, the horn deity is also represented in one of the pots, which I have seen its picture, its drawing from Padri. I think Professor Sonawane would be better to focus light on this. Some Cordesian type early Harappan pottery was also found in the Kunal excavations, which I carried out in 2016 to 2019, which represent horn deity, and 4 shards I have selected here for showing to you. Otherwise, from Kunal and Virdana in Haryana, both are nearby sites, and from the early Harappan levels going back to prior to 3200 BC, and in between 3200 BC to 4000 or 4200 BC, such type of pottery is available, which is called in the Sindh area as Cordesian. Now there is an interesting seal also from Mohenjo-daro, having horn deity inside a kalash and a priest. And in the lower part are 7 hotas or saptarshi below. I'll explain it later on, but you just keep it in your mind, this depiction of the seal which was found in Mohenjo-daro. And You can see on the left corner there is a S-shaped jar in which there is a deity, which is a horn deity standing inside the jar. And there are plants, the leaves of plants coming out from the jar. And one person is seated next to it, in between the jar and the animal, and he is doing something. So this is one depiction. In the lower part of it, there are 7 deities with a peculiar type of headgear. Now, the pots with such depictions must have indicated their sacred nature and were reserved for the particular use of keeping som juice. This early 4th to early 3rd millennium BC period represents the early Vedic period when the word Asur stood for divine lords as a synonym of devas, unlike the next phase of early Vedic period itself, from when it has been used in connoting demons. The motif of horn deity disappeared in the mature Harappan times, and the horn headgear or crown is attached with some deities, particularly with that which is referred as Proto-Shiva. The cultural phase showing the non-divinity of Asuras who were continued to be thought as demons or enemy of the gods in the Vedic pantheon. The horn headgear can be seen on various seals, tablets, and also on one terracotta cake from Kalibangan,
ठीक हो गया क्या इसका फाइन है भाई
which is similar to that of the traditional Tibetan hat still used, giving impression of the hours of worship. Indian
I
art.
request to please be on mute. Please be on mute. Respected members, please be on mute.
Indian art and tradition have some gods and demons with animal faces, and Mahish or Mahishasur is one of them who gets trampled by the goddess in Indian tradition. This demon can be equated to the Vedic Asuras created by Prajapati from the breath or Asu, to one of the Asur deities of Semitic origin, which appeared in Assyria as the national god of the people. Asur, king of all the gods, enabling the Assyrians to destroy the enemies of Asur. It is believed that he was the local god of Asur, the earlier capital, and became a national god when the capital was shifted to Nineveh. He is often represented as a man with a horn cap and carrying a bow, and his face appears in the middle of a winged circle, shooting an arrow or stretching out his hand. This emblem is up on everything royal, robes, rock carvings, obelisks, etc. A probable suggestion is that Asur represents an early ruler or king, but later he was closely identified with the ruler of heaven and earth. Correlating the Cordesian form with the one mentioned in the early Rigvedic hymns in the 7th mandal as well as in the 5th mandal, as Shambar, the Asur, whose 99 puras or fortified citadels were demolished by Indra. and Vishnu, or with whom the Devas were always at fight, and the final defeat of the Asuras in the Devasur Sangram constantly point towards two larger groups of people, the worshippers of Devas and Asuras uh, separately, who were continuously fighting with each other. It seems that immediately to the west of the South Asia, the worshippers of Ahur Mazda and Zarathustra, carved out the particular form of worship with the legacy going back to the common early Vedic origin. The inhabitants of the Indus Saraswati Ganga region continued to make reforms in their tradition, having the original sense of supreme divine spirit of the Vedic Asuras changed into the form of demons or Ahuras of the Zoroastrians in the sense of God and correlating Devas, all such developments taking place in the Rigvedic times only. Regarding Shambar, Asko Parpola has stated that in the non-Vedic region of the Tantras, he is a terrifying and erotic manifestation of Shiva in the form of a buffalo. And in the Shakta pantheon, Shambar has a counterpart in Mahishasur who has a great fish in his flag, Timidhvaj, according to the Ramayana. So these are a little later evidences. Now there are certain Egyptian connections also. There are some figures which I have tried to give it here. The horned human and animal deities such as Chunam, Chnum, the god of the waters, Sibet, the crocodile-headed god, Isis, the deity having all bounteous nature, Anubis, the escort of the dead, and Thoth, the moon god, were very common in the early Egyptian culture and have been depicted in art with their label names. The combination of sun and moon can be found in the Vedic deity Agni Shom, Agni plus Som, as Agni is the sun on earth and Som represents moon. The 19th Sukta of the 10th Mandal of Rigved is dedicated to various aspects of Som, protection, increase, and making healthy not only cows but also horses, bestowing children, drinking happiness, power, and long life to those who perform sacrifice, protect cows from panis, and recover obstacles from sunshine, establish stars in the sky, and release rivers from forcible possession of Vritra and Agni in their syncretic form becomes Agni Shom and jointly requested to appear at the sacrificial place in Rigveda. And the mantra goes, Agni Shoma Savedasa Sahuti Vanatam Girah Sang Devatra Babhuvathu. And also Agni Shoma Vimani No Yuvam Havya Jujoshatam Amatamup Nah Sacha. I'm not giving the translations, but from the mantra itself you can understand that there is some relation of how the joint deities have been mentioned in Rigveda. A number of references contained in Rigveda describes mostly the pot containing som as either Kalash or Drona. From ninth mandal, there are two more mantras. Esh Devo Amartya Parnaviriv Diyate Abhi Dronanyasadam or Punanah Kalasheshwa Vastranya Rusho Hare Parigavyanyavat Parigavyanyavyat. Thus, the pre-Harappan pots with painting of horn deity were seemingly meant to contain som juice, which was often mixed with either milk or curd, with the help of a possible wooden mixer or mathani, whose representation along with horn deity can be identified on one of the two pots representing the horn deity from the archaeological site of Kunal. So again, coming back to the fig deity seal from Mohenjo-daro, about which we just had a glimpse earlier, the so-called fig deity seal from Mohenjo-daro, that is M1186, has been attributed by Parpola to Durga, which does not seem to be correct. Besides the inscription in Harappan script at top, it contains 3 prominent figures in its upper half and 7 figures in a series in the lower half. The two human figures in the upper half wear horned headgear and thus have divine status. One is shown standing within an elongated perforated jar with stand and leaves coming out of the perforations of it. I tend to identify the standing figure in the jar with Agni Shom as Ram, the vehicle of Agni, is shown standing behind the kneeling figure in front of the jar. The kneeling figure has raised his hands in order to get something which could be Somras itself, and the kneeling figure can be identified with Indra, who is respectively repeatedly mentioned in Rigveda, for whom Som is prepared for destruction of enemies and demons. Som itself has been mentioned as assuming the form of Indra as destroyer of demons like Vritra. And it goes in the ninth mandal. Vibharti char vindrasya nama yena vishwane vritra jaghana. Both the deities look alike with common headgear and hand ornament. Some object is kept on a stool in front of the kneeling deity, which seems to be a bowl with 2 spoons and not a chopped human head as believed by Parpola. So it seems that there is a bowl and there are 2 spoons kept over there. At the extreme end, the squarish object seems to be the sacrificial pit. At one place, the syncretic form of Som and Vayu within the pot is mentioned in Rigveda. Pavaman dhiya hito ibhi yonim kanikadat dharmana vayuma visha. The lower part of the seal has 7 figures in a series with long plaits of hair and common type of headgear, and they wear skirt-like garment and full hand ornament. They can be identified with Rigvedic 7 enduring forces, Saptadhitayah, which develop the Som. Again mentioned in the 9th mandal, 8th sukt and 2nd month, that these Saptadhitayah, they develop the Som. or they can also be identified with 7 rivers, Saptadhiti Bhir Hito Nadya, whom the Som makes happy, or with 7 Yajakas or Hutara or Sapta Vipra, that is Saptarishis, who perform the sacrifice for purification of Som. But to identify the 7 figures accurately as per iconographic details, it seems better to refer to Rigved 9th Mandal, where it is stated that the Som also shines like the 7 mouths or 7 rays of light. Vishwa Yadrupa Paryatya Kvabhi Saptasyebhi. It is to be mentioned here that Agni has 7 tongues through which it takes the Havish, and the sun rides on the chain of 7 horses, which represent 7 days, which make the entire world colorful, illuminated. Agni Shom should therefore sparkle the world through the 7 personified rays, as their syncretic form represents Surya and Chandra both. Surya evagneyash chandramah somyah. This is mentioned in Shatpat Brahma. Rigved also provides an indication of the period in the second mantra of the 112th sukta of the 9th mandal, where it is stated in connection with praise of Som that the craftsmen used to make arrows with the help of old and dried wood, feather of birds, and sharp stone pieces, which were apparently microliths. जरती भीरोषधीभिः पर्णेभिः शकुनानां कर्मारो अश्मभिर्द्युभिर्हिरण्यन्तमिच्छतीन्द्रामिन्द्रो परिस्रव. The horn headgear or crown in the historical period remained confined to asuras, or in particular with Mahishasur as depicted in art, discontinued from the older tradition of early Vedic, pre-Harappan and Harappan, where asuras were originally conceived to have been in possession of supernatural and divine powers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. B.R. Mani sir, for enlightening us through your lecture, in which you have made us aware about the correlation of the available textual references and archaeological data through the lecture on this particular topic of colors in Indian art, tradition and archaeology. Some new interpretations which we all have listened to you very patiently. Now, moving towards the next segment of the session, that is the discussion by our panelists, and I am happy to announce that today we have 2 prominent, eminent scholars who are our panelists, Professor B.S. Sonawane ji and Dr. J.S. Kharagwal ji. Before I call upon Professor B.S. Sonawane sir for his remarks on the lecture given by Dr. B.R. Mani, I would like to introduce in brief about him. During his dedicated academic service of 50 years, Dr. B.S. Sonawane has extensively worked on the various aspects of the prehistoric, protohistoric and the historical archaeology, beside that of the rock art in India. He has been associated with the various important premier academic governing bodies of the country, such as General Secretary for the Society of South Asian Archaeology, SOSA, member of a standing committee by the virtue of Central Advisory Board of Archaeology, CABA, of Archaeological Survey of India, member of World Heritage Committee constituted by the Archaeological Survey of India, member of advisory committee appointed by central government to monitor the ongoing excavations at Vadnagar, member of advisory committee for Adi Drish department of the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, New Delhi, and the vice chairman of the Indian Archaeological Society, New Delhi. During his academic career, he has conducted excavations at Champaner, Tarshang, Wagad, Nageshwar, Nagwara, Ratanpura, Moti Pipli, Datrana, Santhali, and Bagasra. And he has participated and made presentations at more than 100 national and international seminars and published more than 100 research articles in national and international journals. He has traveled widely for academic purpose in countries like Australia, France, Italy, Malaysia, Iran, Singapore, Thailand, Sri Lanka, China, Hungary, besides New Zealand. Apart from his active involvement in achieving the World Heritage status for Pavagadh Champaner and the discovery of the intact zinc furnace at the Jawar in Rajasthan, his contribution for the Gujarat securing her permanent place in the field of rock art in the country is also recognized. Identification of the regional indigenous Chalcolithic cultures and the role of the rural settlement in the development of the Harappan urban settlement in Gujarat is considered as his major research output. Apart from recipient of the 4th time Hari Om Ashram Award and the Vijay Ratna Award for his contribution in Indian archaeology, he has received Dr. V.S. Wakankar Award instituted by Indian Archaeological Society for the best field archaeologist for the year 2010 and Dr. Vishnu Wakankar National Award by the Baba Saheb Apte Smarak Samiti, Delhi in 2011. He has received R.C. Parikh Gold Medal for Lifetime Achievement by the Gujarat Itihas Parishad in 2013. Recently, the government of Madhya Pradesh bestowed on him Dr. Vishnu Sridhar Wakankar National Award for the year 2016-17 at Bhopal in 2021. So with this brief introduction, I would like to request Professor V.S. Sonavane sir to give his comment, to put his viewpoint on the lecture delivered by Dr. B.R. Mani.
So it is a pleasure, Mani Saab, to hear you on this particular present evening. The lecture series organized by Indology Foundation Delhi. Of course, it's my pleasure to be here. Now, we have been hearing you for so many occasions and you talked on different topics. So every time we are enjoying. But out of this, to be very frank, today's lecture is one of the best one. And that too on a topic like Kalasha in Indian art and tradition. So you started the lecture with showing the slides, particularly depiction of colors in the art form, particularly in the temples, in the sculptures, in the paintings. And then you went back the same representation in the form of horn deities, right from the early Harappan pottery. And then subsequently, I don't know how to describe it, but you have given such a thorough explanation of the occurrence of these horn deities in different ceramic types, not only the early Harappan, mature Harappan, late Harappan, but the regional Chalcolithic cultures also. Particularly, you talked about the Banas Chalcolithic culture. Then you talked also about the Padri, which is one of the indigenous Chalcolithic communities of Gujarat. And then you could show the continuity of the tradition. There is nothing, there is no gap. I think the concept was accepted to everyone, whether they were Harappans or the non-Harappans. But the cultural elements were understood by everybody and people knew the significance of this particular art form. And so it is difficult. Now, I'm not that expert that I should comment on your lecture or what you talk, but I am one of the great admirer of you, sir. Because every time I get some new inspiration from you and it gives the depth of knowledge you have acquired. And the most advantage, you being the hardcore archaeologist, field worker, and the great scholar of Sanskrit. That is the main reason you could interpret the archaeological data recovered from excavations, and that is the reason means you can talk on such a deep uh, uh, knowledge on every aspect. Now, Indian culture, if you say one who has clear understanding of the Indian culture, only one can interpret the Indian antiquities. Now, for example, you talked about the interpretations given by Asko Parkora and others, because they are not the people, they have not understood the Indian culture, and therefore, naturally, you are not able to get or expect right appreciation or interpretation of that. So, for that, one has to be Indian, one has to be Indian background, then and then one can talk about our traditions, our culture, and our interpretations. Now, for example, I would like to suggest here there is a one common depiction in the Indus seals that is a standard place in front of unicorn, and that standard has been identified by Mahadevan as a utensil for preparing somras. So here we are talking is talk about som and somras, and that instrument is meant for he has a detailed article on that how that somras was prepared through the holes in that container. So that also you can add in as one of your point in the pots or containers having som. So there also that continuity is there. Then I would also like to say here that is there is one not archaeologist but he is very much interested in archaeology and he is a Sanskrit scholar, P.V. Pathak. Like you, he is also trying to understand various stanzas in the Rig Veda or in other Vedas and try to interpret them. And he has identified quite many large number of Indus seals. So I would appreciate people like you who can really understand Indian culture and take us to and the interpretations. So I am extremely thankful to you, Dr. Mani, and also I am thankful to Dr. Lalit Mishra, and of course Vinay Kumar and others, those who are all assembled here, giving me. I don't say this opportunity given to me because I just okay whatever I heard and just I talked on that, commented on that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving your valuable and remarkable comment on this lecture. And now I would like to call upon another authority of archaeology, Dr. Kharagwal sir, who is among us today, and he is an alumnus of Deccan College, Pune, who has done extensive research work in archaeology, and we all know that he is a student of Professor B.N. Mishra sir, and right now he is professor in archaeology and the director Sahitya Sansthan, Udaipur, and he has been associate professor, assistant professor. So he has a long association with this pedagogy field, and he has the vast experience of archaeology in way of exploration and excavating so many sites. He has published many books, excavation reports, monographs, and his papers have been published in so many international journals. And he has also presented papers in international conferences. And more than 10 he as a student he has supervised, and he has been honored by so many academic bodies. And some of the important contribution in the form of the book by him: Archaeological Exploration in Kumayu Himalaya, Central Himalaya and Archaeological Linguistic and Cultural Synthesis, South Asian Prehistory, South Asian Bronze and Iron Age, Indian Zinc Technology in the Global Perspective, and Kamer monograph. It is a monograph, Kamer Excavation, a unique Harappan township in Kutch region, and Archaeology of Rajasthan, another monograph written by him, and Beside this, he has the experience of excavating the sites, so many sites like the sites of Kamer, as well as excavation in the Jaisalmer district under the Indo-Japanese project. And he has also done the exploration in the Dungarpur and the Banswara district of Rajasthan. And also he has done excavation at Chandravati, at Abu Road, and he has participated in so many international deliberations and the seminars. So with this brief introduction about him, who is an authority among us here, I would like to request him for giving his opinion on the talk of Dr. B.R. Mani.
Vinayji, thank you very much for this long introduction. Actually, I do not deserve this. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes.
sir, you are audible, sir.
Saying something against the teachers like Mani Saab and Sonone sir is there. So it is embarrassing actually. We are like their students only. And I have to thank the Indology Foundation for giving me this opportunity to be here. And it is really very hard to comment something on a lecture given by Mani Saab. It is the doyen of Indian archaeology. And Sir Sonone sir has rightly pointed out, he has traveled from Kalas to Som to, Ephedra, coming down to historic temples, and then taking us to the Harappan. He has covered almost everything. So commenting on such a lecture is a very difficult thing. And on top of everything, as sir say, he is a combination of person knowing Sanskrit literature, and then being hardcore archaeologist. And his contribution to Ayodhya everybody knows. Not only Ayodhya, he has done so much of work. As many as times as sir said, we heard him every time. It is all the time new information. But I was very happy to see a question from Dr. Paul. It was very interesting. We need to have a lot of discussions on these lines actually, because one of the point I would just casual reference would like to make it here is that recently one of our friend Prabodh from Kutch has come up with a very, very interesting observation. One of his Canadian friend has come up with an analysis that the perforated pots were possibly used for preparing dairy products. This is also an interesting aspect. Earlier, all of us were thinking ये सहस्त्र स्नान के लिए शायद राज्याभिषेक के लिए भी इस्तेमाल होता है. As Mani Saab already showed some of the examples from temples. That is very interesting. But ये एक और फंक्शन आ रहा है सामने. और जैसे रविंद्र जी ने ऑलरेडी पॉइंट आउट किया, तो मेरे ख्याल से दिस इज वंडरफुल. न्यू रिसर्चेस आर कमिंग अप. And coming back to Kalas part, I have to salute Sir Mani sir. Taking back to the pre-Hadappans and coming down to the pre-modern times. You have put everything in a thread and showed how continuity is there. थोड़ा सा बीच में गैप है सर. वो गैप जो Iron Age का है, when your Hadappans are disappearing from the scene, then coming to the second urbanization. I'm sure वो कलश का जो formation है, जो concept है, जो idea है, may be there also. Good that you have already pointed out this material. So some of us can look into that issue कि वहाँ भी कलश का वो material है. All you said, taking to buffalo, showing its depiction in the form of in pottery pots, and then taking it to the seals and all that. मुझे ऐसा लग रहा था, you are saying this is Indus ideology. I hope you agree with me. You are saying this was Indus ideology. This ideology, as Sonone sir has rightly pointed out, was not only accepted to the Indus people, but also to the local Chalcolithic regional regional, rural people also. Sir, मुझे continuity का एक बहुत interesting aspect है, which I would like to add here is that till recently, till maybe 3 or 4 years ago, many parts of the Himalayan region had a very strong tradition killing a male buffalo, sacrificing male buffalo to the deity. I don't know how long this tradition, how old this tradition is. If it has any connection with the Vedic, issues like Mahesh Mardani concept, or even earlier, or what you are saying, Durga. Does it go back to that time, or does it go back to the ideology of the Harappans? Any idea is coming. The other issue connected to this is there is something called somebody called Asur Banipal coming from Syria. In the Mesopotamian region, in the central part of Mesopotamia, and then you have a strong current in Himachal Pradesh, in Uttarakhand, in parts of Nepal, coming down to parts of Bihar, going to Assam. In Bihar itself, the people, those who are making iron, called Asur, and their iron technology is called Asur Vidya. So we do not know if the Asur, those who are connected with the Kamakhya in Assam, Asur, those who are were connected with iron technology in Central Himalaya, and with Asurs in Bihar, and Asurs coming from central part of Mesopotamia. Do they have any connection? We do not know why are they called all Asur. And do we have any connection with the Asur you said coming from Vedic text? The ideology of Vedic text is not confined only to the Indus area, to India only, but it is also there, crossing to the Iran ka Pathar. Now I think Sir has rightly pointed out, if you want to understand the archaeological material of India, we need to have Indic idea, we need to have its function, we need to have understanding of its ideology, then maybe we can have better interpretation of this. I think you are on the right track pointing out Professor Asko had done a wrong interpretation. I know many of his interpretations are widely appreciated, but identifying something as Durga which is not there is rightly pointed out. I think this we have to appreciate, and the idea you are saying, you all need to train ourselves in the Indic studies. I therefore thank you very much for this wonderful lecture. I learned so many things from this. Actually, without your permission, many of your pictures I have clicked with mobile for our learning and for asking my students to
You will be getting
learn from this.
in the YouTube.
Here, I would
Okay, sir.
like to request you on behalf of the audience and the
Vinayji, Mishra-ji, Verma-ji, all sahab, thank you very much. And Mani sir, I learned so many things from this lecture. I'm very fortunate that I am part of this lecture.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your views and providing the inputs on the lecture given today on colors in Indian art, tradition, and archaeology. So after the valuable remarks given by our panelists, Professor V.S. Sonavane and Dr. J.S. Karagwalji, so this forum is now open for the discussion by the other distinguished audience and the guests who are present here. If they want, they can just unmute themselves and they can have their doubts clear, or if they want to give any input, they can ask to our panelist or to our chief speaker of today's lecture, Dr. B.R. Mani. So it is open for the audience now.
My question is that I find the translations and the implications of these suktas as literal translation, the way the West does it. What I do not see is the allegorical and the deeper meanings of this. For example, if I look at the Durga Sukta in the Taittiriya Samhita, it has a connotation of totally different. So the question is, for example, if you look at the corresponding Devi Mahatmya or Devi Rahasya, not Mahatmya, Devi Rahasya, the implications of the Durga and the corresponding Asura is in terms of the corresponding the nature of the human being or a living being, and the corresponding asura killing etc. is in those terms, which is true that the corresponding there is a connotation of the asura and the deva the way you presented, because this division occurred at some stage, but it has a larger connotation of in the form of the when you talk of the Indian cosmology, because Indian cosmology is not mundane from the point of view of the someone had a magic wand and created something. It has its fundamental unit is consciousness, and from consciousness arises everything. And Durga is shown as a Shakti actually in many places of the Shiva, and as a Isha Shakti. So why is the interpretation of this whole thing being presented in the Western terminology connotations, and not the way Indians have thought about these issues? That's my question.
I don't think it is in the terms of how the Western scholars. I have taken the Sanskrit texts themselves, and I have read the Hindi and English translations of the text, and then accordingly I have tried to put that evidence which we find in the archaeological sites at the pottery, in the pottery, particularly one type of pottery which can be identified, which was used for putting the sown juice, and it should not be used for any other purpose. That was probably the main objective behind making such pots, so that everyone in the house can understand that this particular pot contains sown juice. So that is one aspect. And then so far the different cosmological concepts of Durga and other deities are concerned, it all developed a lot in later times. And initially in the Rigvedic period, which I consider that it was a very long period, Asuras, probably it was one time when Asuras and Devas, Asuras had the divinity, as also mentioned in a number of places in the Rigvedic texts. But at certain phase later on, the Asuras were only worshipped in the Zoroastrian culture or other West Asian cultures, but they became demons so far as the Vedic culture is concerned.
No, I don't actually. I think you are right about that aspect, but the same metaphor could be used in many ways, and that's what my concern is. Because
So, Dr. Ravindra Kaul, with respect to your comments on Dr. B.R. Mani's presentation, particularly this part of Sura and Asura, I would like to add something from my side, from the Indology Foundation side. That is, in the Rig Veda, both Sur and Asur, that means God and demon, they are one and same entity. Brihaspati is Sur and Asur both, one and same time. Agni is both Sur and Asur, one and same time. Indra is both Sur and Asur, one and same time. So this feature, when one and same God is called Shur and Asur both, gives us a bottom line of the period Rig Veda was compiled. That is when this division between Shur and Asur did not happen. This division did not take place. That means it is pre-Avestan. So that is the one part that should be added to our interpretation of Shur and Ashur. Secondly, is Honorable Dr. B.R. Mani has shown us that the westward diffusion of Vedic culture or the Aryan culture, that is true, or Indus Valley culture, that is true if we overcome ourselves from the clutches of the ongoing interpretation, the prevailing interpretation, because there is a river called Olga, and the Olga's name, as mentioned by Herodotus, as Raha. Raha is given in the Rig Veda as Rasha. So Sa or S becomes H or Ha. So Sa to Ha transformation takes place, as we know. Now we have to ask question, and I would encourage our students also to raise this question in their classrooms to their professors of history, particularly I talk about Indian universities, then all the central universities, DU, JNU, Hyderabad, Kolkata, and other universities, I would encourage students to ask when this naming would have been happened, when the makers of the Rig Veda would have named the river Volga as Rasha, and that name gets recognized by Herodotus. So it gives us a new perspective to look at the way we are looking at the Vedic culture or the Aryan culture or the Indus Valley or the Harappan culture. As we know that we in India we had witnessed two organized things. First is the well-organized Indus Valley culture, and then the well-organized scripture called Rig Veda that is well indexed as well. So it looks illogical to say that a well-organized culture had not left anything in terms of the text or mythologies or the scriptures behind it, and the people who made such a well-organized scripture called Rig Veda have not left an archaeological traces behind them. So this is all about from my side on the Shur and Ashura, which demands more studies, more curiosity, and more work, more researchers from the student side as well as from the scholar side. Thank you.
I completely agree with everything you have said. I mean, I don't have disagreement with that. So far as the material aspect culture is concerned, its representation has to be corresponding. But however, that metaphor could have been used for many places. In particular, Durga, in particular, which I see right from very early on,
Yes, metaphors are important because common people understand their history with the help of metaphor better and easily. However, as far as goddess Durga is concerned, she is not mentioned in the Rig Veda. Of course, the term Durga is found, but it is found in the context of Durgam places or the places inaccessible or where it is difficult to reach. But I would also like to underline that yes, goddesses are mentioned in the Rig Veda: Saraswati, Bharati, Ida, and the Rastri.
Anyway,
yes. Just now, Dr. Mani, to respond to you.
No, they are later additions. And one thing I would also like to mention that the antiquity of the Vedic culture must be taken back to at least 4th millennium BC. Not following Max Muller's theory that there was an Aryan invasion on India, or the Vedic culture starts from 12th century BC. So these are all the aspects which the Western scholars were putting forth, and even in the West itself, the scholars like Whitney and others, they had contradictions. So far as the time is concerned, time bracket is concerned, the 4th, 3rd millennium BC for the Vedic, early Vedic texts, as well as the material culture represented by the particular pottery of early Hadappans, they are quite coeval.
Right.
A sentence.
Please.
Sir.
Please.
Sir, I must congratulate you for a wonderful talk, and linking the pond deity with the water pot, especially the pot for making soap. And here, one thing we can also add that Rigved also talks about the Shatadhar Kalash, and in this regard, the perforated pot can be taken into account, and this, if this could be linked with this Kalash, that will be very wonderful. That is only my.
A quick comment. We would like to second observation of Dr. Ravin Kumar on the Shatadhar Kalasha of the Rig Veda. Happy to say that once we also came across the same reference. And so what is happening today is a great coincidence. 4 different distincts are conjoining on same point. And then what it calls for? It calls for serious review how we look at the excavations of Indus Valley sites and the information contained in the Rig Veda. I am so tempted that not able to control that once there was a heated debate also on a similar point. The debate happened between Harvard's Michael Witzel, head of the Department of Sanskrit, and Indian scholar who has written a lot on the same subject, Bhagwan Singh Ji. Bhagwan Singh Ji is recently awarded with the Lohia Sahitya Award.
Good evening, Mani sir. Namaskar. So after a long time to see you. So my question is that is it related with the form of the Laja Gauri, because she is also depicted with the form of lotus, and Purna Kumbha is also depicted with the lotus flower motif. Is it related or not?
No, lotus can be equated, related to Laja Gauri as well as to. But I don't think Laja Gauri has got anything to do with the taking of Som Ras and depiction of the horn deity on the pots or kalash, which were essentially made for keeping the Som.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
एक छोटी बात और पूछना चाहता था. एक्चुअली आई वांटेड टू हैव अ क्वेश्चन बट आई स्किप दैट.
जी
मैं सुनौने सर को भी पूछना चाहता हूँ सवाल, आपको भी पूछना चाहता हूँ कि बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग, यू नो, एक्चुअली व्हेन यू वर डिस्कसिंग अबाउट सोमा एंड द पॉट यू आर शोइंग, क्योंकि इफेद्रा तो चाइनीज वर आल्सो यूजिंग. Now this Som was, if it was known to the Hadappans, like Rohri Church, was it reaching to all the Harappan sites? This is a new line of research. We have to look into the starch and, you know, DNA and whatnot, maybe. Maybe isotope analysis has to be used to look into if ephedra was existing at all the Harappan sites. If yes, this becomes a new dimension for the understanding of the Harappan.
In its very different varieties, it is available right from Iran to North India. So that is one thing. And then we are not only talking about Indus or Indus Saraswati culture. We start from the pre-mature Harappan culture. So maybe early Harappan, some people say early Harappan, some even say pre-Harappan. So it's purely a form of indigenous Indian culture, which developed into Harappan culture on one hand, as well as it reached to different other parts during 3rd, 4th millennium BC, like Gujarat, where you have been doing work. So we can say that the Chalcolithic sites of different regional importance, they were also part of that culture. But Indus culture is quite separate from that, and it adopted the same pre-Indus culture.
I would like to make 2 points regarding the Soma. First of all, we know that Kanishka mentions his grandfather as Homa Vargiya. In the rock edicts of somewhere in the bacteria or somewhere, I don't know what place that is, but he mentions his grandfather as the Homa Vargiya. So it was used as late as Kanishka's period. And number 2 is that I have a friend actually in Afghanistan who told me that till very recently, I mean about 200 years back or so, the Afghan woman used to go sing in the night and go and pick the flowers of the soma tree. Now, where they did it exactly, I don't know that personally, but he was telling me about this story. And the last is a question: is that why do you think the horn head was associated with the pot?
I think half of the slides were dedicated to that part only.
Yeah.
So I understood there's relation, but reason for the relation
depicted in the early Vedic literature, how it is an allegory.
Allegory, okay.
Yeah, simile, and
Okay.
that is adopted in the by the potters who or they were ordered to make pots with such type.
I see.
Dr. Ravindra, with the valuable information given by respected Professor Sonavane ji, and also in view of the comments made by Dr. Ravindra Kaur, I would like to add something from foundation side with respect to Soma. That Soma was always a cash crop in modern parlance, if I say. In Rigveda, from the references available in the Rigveda to Shatpad Brahmana and other places, it comes out that borrowing was not allowed for having Soma. There is a story in the Shatpad Brahmana where it is said that a rishi, a son of a rishi who traveled from Kausambi to Panchal, and there he made a bet of 2 niskas, two niskas for the Soma purpose. So it is said that Rajanam Kidanti Somam. So it all percolates that the Soma was a cash crop that was not found in profundity in Aryavart in the subcontinent of India. Rather, it was brought from some part of Afghanistan or the modern Iran, some part of the Iran, the frontier Iran. With respect to Soma, I would also like to add something from our side, that is the tribes of Dasas and Dasyus, which are mentioned in the Rig Veda, and claimed by a group of our historians that they are the original inhabitants of Indian subcontinent, which is wrong, because Iranian historians have let us know that the Dasas and Dasyus are Daha and Dahai, the ferocious tribes which they have found to live in the northern part of the Iran, and it is with them our Rigvedic Aryans were in constant fight. So this narrative that Dasa and Dasyush were inhabitants of India needs correction, and for that I would encourage our students to raise questions in their history classes, and also I would request to our scholars to do the further researches on it. Why this fight was there? Probably the places of where Soma was cultivated or Soma was grown up naturally were in control of those Dasyus and Dasas, and in order to procure the Soma, because it was a sacred plant, the fight was happening. Also, water could have been another reason, multiple reasons which requires further researches. Aman, I would like to ask you to please show this plant Soma, which is called Bar Soma. I have a book in which author, the title of the book is The Foreign Influences in India. In this book, the author mentions this grass Bar Soma that he came to know through some acquaintance of some of the acquaintance over there.
Thank you, Sri Lalit Misra ji, for your valuable comments as well as inputs on the lectures given by Dr. B.R. Mani on colors in Indian art, tradition and archaeology, and enlightening us about your views, which has created an opportunity to review us the long-held view that that makes us the well-organized culture of Indus Valley civilization. And we know that this particular civilization became the first entrepreneurs of the intercontinental scale, did not leave a text, tradition, or the myth behind them, and the makers of the well-organized Vedic corpus, inventor of the decimal number system and the geometry. And so for this remarkable comment, your views and the inputs, I am very much thankful to you, sir, for your comments as well as views. I would also like to thank Dr. Ravindra Kaulji, Dr. Ravindra Kumar, Ms. Lajja Bhatt for participating in this discussion and giving their inputs as well as views. And now, at last but not the least, I would like to, with humble request, I would like to call upon Mrs. Vaisali Chavanji for giving her concluding remarks for today's lecture.
Thank you, Vinay sir, for giving me this opportunity. Good evening and namaste, everyone. Myself, I am Mrs. Vaishali Chavan, electronics engineer, researching on Saptarishi, state coordinator of Indology Foundation and proud homemaker. Today is the revolutionary day to set the correct narrative of Hindu. Kalash, the well-known auspicious tradition in Indian culture. What is this Kalash? Why it is so important? When it started? Great endeavor by Indology Foundation to elaborate Kalash. Indology Foundation also hold an internship program for Kalash. Kamandan and Yojana. We are fortunate to have our keynote speaker, Dr. B.R. Manisha's easiest, simple way with finest various pictures to enlighten about Kalash is surprising. Kalasha's significance right from Mandira, Gopuram in numbers 157 was depend upon artists. Then in Kashmir, Buddhism, Jainism, plus Kalasha as Kumbha in zodiac sign. In Ashok Stambha as Purna Ghar represents a container of fertility, the earth and the womb which nourishes life. Amrit Kalash or pot having nectar is associated in the Indian culture. Kalasha's Vedic connection, the entire ninth mandala, containing more than 1100 hymns. Kalash in early Harappan culture. Iranian Huma, horn deity and wooden mixer on Kalash from Kunal, Haryana. Seal from Mohenjo-daro, an Egyptian connection, and so on. First time we come to know about such a tremendous knowledge about Kalash, and we are so proud having such an ancient culture continuing till the date. Right now we are celebrating Ghatastapana. In Navratri, the seeds we sow around the Ghat or Kalash grows full on ninth day, is the symbol of life nourishment, and in Maharashtra we worship books, machines and every household, factories and offices by those grown grains and flowers. This continued tradition of Kalasha in India, the legacy is unimaginable. To know the ancient, true first-hand knowledge about Hindu without any ideology and without bias, we are fortunate to have dignitaries Professor Vishwasrao S. Sonami, former professor and head department of archaeology and ancient history, Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, Vadodara, Gujarat, Professor J. S. Kharakwal, professor in archaeology and director, Sahitya Sansthan, Dr. Ravindra, and other renowned panelists. The words from all erudite scholars are valuable and looking forward to hear once again from them. Founder Lalit Mishra sir's efforts are unparalleled. Professor Vinay Kumar sir from BHU acknowledged many factors about Kalash and great help for Indology Foundation. Our co-founder Praveen Mishra sir is also helps a lot, and Aman, who is a student but great enthusiast and hosting this program and looking the technical part is great. I appeal to audience, please subscribe Indology Foundation's YouTube channel, like Insta, Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter. Indology Foundation provides original knowledge about India's every aspect. Stay tuned. Now I would like to call Vidya Mansini, ma'am. Ma'am, please, few words from you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
मैं विंध्यवासिनी इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन संस्थान के व्याख्यान में उपस्थित सभी विद्वज्जनों को सादर प्रणाम करती हूँ तथा आज के व्याख्यान के मुख्य वक्ता डॉक्टर VR मनी सर के प्रति भी इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन की ओर से हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ। सर का व्याख्यान कलश इन इंडियन आर्ट एंड ट्रेडिशन नामक शीर्षक पर आधारित था। सर का व्याख्यान आज के शीर्षक के ही जैसे सर के ज्ञान रूपी कलश से परिपूर्ण था, जिसमें सर ने कलश के विविध पहलुओं पर सविस्तार वर्णन किया। सर ने कलश का वर्णन चित्रांकन, शिल्पांकन तथा साहित्य व पुरातत्व के माध्यम से प्राप्त इन सभी साक्ष्यों पर सविस्तार पूर्वक हम सबके समक्ष प्रस्तुत किया, जिसके लिए मैं एक बार पुनः इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन की ओर से मनी सर का हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ तथा इसके साथ ही डॉक्टर VH सोनावने सर द्वारा की गई महत्वपूर्ण टिप्पणियों के लिए भी मैं इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन की ओर से डॉक्टर VH सोनावने सर के प्रति भी हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ। इसके साथ ही साथ डॉक्टर जीवन खरगवाल सर द्वारा भी आज के व्याख्यान पर की गई महत्वपूर्ण टिप्पणियों एवं सुझाव के लिए भी मैं इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन की ओर से डॉक्टर जीवन खरगवाल सर के प्रति भी हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ। आज के कार्यक्रम के संचालक डॉक्टर विनय कुमार सर के प्रति भी इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन की ओर से मैं आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ। इसके साथ ही साथ इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन संस्थान के संस्थापक श्री ललित सर के प्रति भी मैं हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ, जिनके कारण आज के धन्यवाद ज्ञापन करने के लिए मुझे यह शुभ अवसर प्राप्त हुआ। इसके साथ ही साथ अंत में मैं इंडोलॉजी फाउंडेशन संस्थान के अन्य सभी कर्मचारियों, सहयोगी सदस्यों के प्रति भी मैं एक बार पुनः हृदय से आभार व्यक्त करती हूँ। धन्यवाद।